Hello, this is George Hutton, and you are listening to the Mind Persuasion Podcast. Today we continue our study of weaponized hypnosis. For more information, please visit mindpersuasion.com/weaponized-hypnosis. In today's podcast, we'll be talking about how to practice. Unlike other nested loop patterns, you'll only need to memorize and practice a couple of these. For example, if you are going to use nested loops in sales or in giving presentations, not only would you need to memorize several, but you'd eventually need to start creating your own. But because these are purposely designed to be emotionally deadly and to create a deep desire in the subject's mind to distance themselves from you or even the thought of you, one or two of these is all you'll ever need. And since these are needed only for those few people in your life, you won't find yourself using these horrible loops in everyday conversations. Take the time to memorize at least one of these. You'll find that having an imaginary conversation with your enemy, when you take the time to deliver all the commands with as much presence as you can, will give you a lot of power. It will destroy any feelings of being a victim, and it will make it much easier to face them, even if you never intend to use the loops. How to learn. Start by memorizing each story on its own. At first, just remember the 5 steps of each story. Choose one loop, one story, and practice telling the story, one of the 4, out loud. When you can go through all the main points, parts 1 through 5, then you can begin to expand the stories. Once you can spend a minute or two on one story, including any commands, then start to stack them. Stacking them means tell one story from start to finish, and then tell the second story from start to finish. Once you've got 2 stories down, put one in the middle of the other. Then you'll have a short nested loop. One story that's broken in 2 with one full story in the middle. Once that becomes easy, increase to 3 and then 4. Once you've got all 4 down, work on your technique, just like an actor would. Tell it to yourself in the mirror and practice using all the anchors. Because the intent of these stories is to deliver as much devastation to their minds as possible, the energy you tell them with is important. Ideally, you want to use the same facial expressions, voice tone, and anchors that you use when talking about things they want to do. This means you'll need to tell the story using the same facial expressions and energy that you would when describing an exciting thriller movie that you really enjoyed watching. Because some of these stories include ideas that are allegedly true, this may seem strange and difficult. Always remember the effect that you are intending to create a deep feeling of revulsion whenever your target thinks about you. It may cause you to feel guilty to tell these stories even alone while using nonverbal energy, usually associated with positive stories. However, the more you can deliver these with that same nonverbal energy, the more of an impact they'll have. And the more you can practice delivering them, the less you'll feel the need to. Use them with anchors that are set. It's one thing to imagine using these stories on an enemy you rarely speak to at length. They will give you a much stronger sense of power if you use them with anchors that you have taken the time to set with your target. If you have had actual conversations with them, and you've elicited actual things that they've talked about as positive things they've liked about their future, this will make them much more powerful. One way to practice these is to first recall that conversation. Have it again with them as if they were there. Recall the same things they've said and repeat them using your anchors. Then tell as many loops as you can using those same anchors. When practicing, be as vicious as you can. This is much like having an imaginary shouting match with your boss after the fact, only instead of vaguely angry shouts that usually only last a few seconds, this will be much more targeted and much more controlled, and you'll feel a much deeper sense of vicarious mental destruction you are delivering to your target. Always dig 2 graves. The old saying in all revenge movies is to first dig 2 graves. Ideally, you would use these, your enemies would leave you alone, and that would be that. But we humans are unpredictable creatures. If you are thinking of using these on somebody you work with and will have to deal with in a professional manner, then it is very likely you will naturally be very hesitant about using these. There is a reason they are treating you in a way that causes you to think of them as an enemy. Chances are those reasons won't go away because you've given them nightmares. Many of these nested loop stories contain elements meant to fade their memory slightly. There is no telling what the response might be. Consider using these only as an absolute last resort and only when you can ensure that you'll never have any legitimate need to be near them again. If you can ghost them effectively, that is a much better solution. Just like in self-defense, only when retreat is not an option and your back is to the wall should you bring out these patterns. Practicing single stories. An entire set of loops, especially if you use as much nonverbal technology as you can, will take several minutes. But you can also practice the single stories. Who can you practice these on? Anybody that calls you uninvited, telemarketers, religious folks who come knocking, or anybody else that thinks they can walk up out of nowhere and steal your attention. For example, let's say you hear a knock on your door. You look through your peephole and see a couple of young men in white shirts and neckties. You are feeling playful, so you open the door. They start their pitch and you ask a few questions to get them to open up a bit. Then you can say it reminds you of a movie you saw. They will ask you to elaborate, and you can tell them that one about the couple whose daughter was murdered and ended up torturing the wrong guy. Sure, that has nothing to do with what they were talking about. Sure, that is a horrible story to tell a couple of morally upright religious folks. But there's no law that says when you invited people into your home you need to be polite. After all, think of the message they were delivering to you. You are living the wrong life. Unless you believe the things we believe you are going to end up in hell forever. That's not a nice message to try and convince somebody of. Also, if you practice on unexpected guests and telemarketers, it will give you a real sense of the power of these stories, even if you don't have it in you to tell them about Mr. and Mrs. Torture. You can simply look for the presuppositions within their statements and ask them why they think those things are true. You'll find that even the most stringent believers in any religion won't last very long when you keep asking them variations of, how do you know that is true? Practicing one-liners. The one-liner presuppositional ego slams are easy to practice. Go through them until you find 3 or 4 that work well. You can rewrite them based on various situations, but once you've got 5 or 6 down, you can practice those on strangers with deadly effectiveness. Just be careful of whom you practice them with. Don't walk up to people on the street, politely interrupt them, and then drop an ego bomb. That wouldn't be nice. But with people who call you at dinner time or people who come knocking with a little bit of effort, you can come up with 5 or 6 go-to lines to say to telemarketers who call unexpectedly. For example, if you get a call from a telemarketer, tell them you're interested and ask for their name. Then say something like this. Okay, John, now I'm at my computer. I see that your name and the number you are calling from has already been put on the national list. You know the one they've been talking about? The blacklist they'll circulate to all employers and credit agencies? I wonder why they haven't told everybody about that yet. I guess as long as you're going to go to jail, they'll figure they'll get a few more calls out of you. What time is it there? Just take whatever structure they are coming from. We have a product you like. We are part of a religion you need to join. We have some political beliefs you need to support. We have a cause you should give money to, etc. And then go through the ego slams and write a few out for the situations you commonly come across. You'll find that writing these out for specific purposes makes them much more interesting. Keep a journal. Whenever you find yourself stuck or otherwise unsure of how to defend against a verbal attack or imposition of any kind, write it down. Then spend a few minutes coming up with something you could have said and then practice saying it. Chances are you'll only need a few quick sentences like the previous one. Most verbal attacks and impositions come in the same basic forms. They have an idea they want you to accept as valid and you want no part of it. Practice 3 levels. If you are momentarily stumped, later write down what they said. Look for the idea that is presupposed in their statement. Come up with 3 or 4 ways to ask why they think that's true from as neutral a standpoint as possible. Then practice an ego slam. Take the time to come up with an effective attack and practice saying it. Finally, find an appropriate story or collection of stories and practice saying them. These are skills, and like any other skills, the more you practice, the better you'll get. I'm George Hutton. Thank you for listening to the Mind Persuasion Podcast. For more information, please visit mindpersuasion.com/weaponized-hypnosis. I look forward to speaking with you again soon.